Emmanuel, very nice to see you again.
Hi, Martin. Nice to hear you. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Yes, unfortunately, there are technical difficulties, and they're on the Swiss side, not on the Cameroonian side. But could you tell
Okay.
me just very briefly a bit about yourself, what you do, and what your connection is to Cameroonian languages?
Okay. First of all, I would like to start talking about the language I grew up speaking. So I'm a speaker of Bassa language. Bassa is a Bantu language spoken in Cameroon, especially in the central region. So this is the language I grew up speaking. My mother and father and all my sisters and brothers, that's the only language that we use for our daily interaction. Then I went to school in a village called Mahomi, where of course we had to switch to French.
At what age did you have to switch to French?
That was about like 6 year olds because you really had to be fit to go to school. We had to walk a long distance, like 5 kilometers in the forest to be
Hmm.
able to go to school. So you really need to be ready for that. So we didn't have anything like nursery schools or anything. So it's about the age of 6 when I shifted to French.
Hmm.
So when I got my first living certificate, so that's the certificate you get from the primary school, I moved to the next, the nearby city, which is called Ezeka, where I attended my secondary school. Then later on moved to the university in the capital, Yaoundé, where I'm speaking from now. And there I did my university studies and I specialized in African linguistics. And now I'm teaching African linguistics at the
Hmm.
University of Yaoundé, one Cameroon.
Could
Yeah.
you tell me about what happened with language policy during the colonial era and then afterwards throughout the country?
Yes, I should recall that Cameroon, and when I name Cameroon, that's a reality that came into being only some, you know, a century and a half ago.
Uh-huh.
So before 1884, there was no Cameroon, and many of the existing the countries that we know today did not exist, at least as internationally recognized political, spaces. Now, what happened since that time is that, of course, many communities speaking, let's say, variety of languages, let's call that the reality languages for lack of a better term. So they came together as a country. Now, German policy was, of course, to rule out the use of local languages, of indigenous languages in favor of German. Then after German came French and British colonialism, which is why Cameroon has inherited two official languages, English and French. In the English speaking part of the country where British ruled in the colonial time, language policy was a little bit, it is believed, it was a little bit, let's say, favorable to national languages because there was a great extent of um, involvement of native speakers in the administration and in school.
Hmm.
So national languages were taught in schools, whereas in the French speaking part, it was more or less the continuation of the German language policy
Hmm.
that consisted in promoting exclusively the use of French. Yeah, that's it.
So, what has government policy been towards education in the schools, especially in secondary schools, since?
Okay. Uh, so the best way to talk about language policy is just to talk about my experience, as I
Hmm.
started talking about. In practice, French and English are the only medium or major of education in formal schools, like government or and private owned schools,
Hmm.
and this has been so ever since independence. That is. shortly after the colonial times. So with time, there has been moves and efforts from the government and the civil societies to push for the inclusion of local languages in education, and this has been a reality since 2010
Mm-hmm.
in Cameroon, where uh, let's say Cameroon-based languages are taught as subject in schools,
Mm-hmm.
not necessarily as major of instruction, but as subject. There's a whole other subject about whether this is done with success or not, but this is the reality. I could also talk about the fact that it's still very marginal, but that's a reality. And one obvious evidence is that I'm head of Department of Cameroonian Languages and Cultures at the Higher Teacher Training, so an institute that trains high secondary school teachers to go and teach indigenous languages. Yes,
Mm-hmm. And so, if a student is taking a chemistry class, for example, they would take that in French or in English.
yes, they will take that in French or English.
How does that affect their performance on the tests at the end of the year?
Well, uh, there are compelling studies, not only in Cameroon, that clearly demonstrate that education, if carried in one's, let's say, native language, the language one feels more comfortable with, of course, that leads to a higher rate of success. So I don't think that that needs to be demonstrated in the case of Cameroon. I don't know of any study that would support a case that if like teaching or studying chemistry were done in local language, that will result in a higher rate of success, or let's say of appropriation of knowledge. But as I can speak for myself, like this conversation we're having now, like I'm lucky to be a scholar, and I usually happen to be invited in international conferences and write scientific papers, and I know what it takes to be able to express my mind, to be able to produce knowledge in a language that is not the language I am more in with intimacy with.
Mm-hmm.
So, like I'm speaking to you now, it takes a lot of effort to me to translate my mind
Right.
into English. That's
Mm-hmm.
a double effort. That's something that's a violence that I have been witnessing. And from my experience, you maybe you can extrapolate it to a situation of a high school kid who moved from the home where uh, the local language is spoken to a school where he now has to confront with uh, teaching not only knowledge that is not immediately available in his, let's say, in his social environment, but it is being taught in a language that is not available to his cognitive apparatus. So that is a very, you know, that's an untold violence
Mm-hmm.
that needs to be stressed. And I don't need to well, we might need some scientific research on this, on specific case of maybe of specific subjects like mathematics. But it's obvious to me that if I were taught mathematics, chemistry, physics, with reference to the things that I was doing on a daily basis, like setting traps. If you are going to set a trap to catch an animal, I'm sorry for those who might not be happy with catching animals, but that's something that I used to do when I was a kid. So that takes a lot of chemistry, I mean, of physics. You have to do a lot of calculations. Even though you don't do it on paper or on a computer, this is something that you operate mentally. And if I were taught in school that what I was doing as a hunt, part of it was physics,
Uh-huh.
maybe I would have appropriated that knowledge more efficiently.
When a teacher has to teach in the French or the English, how competent are they? How well are they able to convey to the students using that language that's also, I guess, to them a foreign language? And then the second question is about, I know it would be a very big guess, but about what percent of people in Cameroon reach the level that you have in French or in English, where you're able to really communicate at a very good level?
That's a very good question. Thank you very much. So there's a provision. So let me try to divert from your question a little bit, but still staying in the spirit of that question. So there's a provision in the Constitution that if someone's is running like for how do you say for so if someone wants to become MP or president or mayor, so they need to be literate. No, what is said is that they need to write and speak either French or English.
Uh-huh.
Okay, what do we mean by to speak or to write? That's that's not very clear. So coming back to your question, how confident are most teachers in conveying knowledge in a language that perhaps is not their the one that they identify with? I can only still speak for myself because I'm a teacher, and that's almost the same thing as if I was speaking from a student side. So even if English and French have been localized, let's say they have been tropicalized in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're speaking English to an American or to a British or French to a French, sometimes they may have a hard time getting entirely what I'm saying. So we have local varieties of French and English that we are happy with. But books that we use are written in the standard languages, either in French or English. So you can see a clear discrepancy between the collective use of even French and English and the standard of language that is available in the books. So, speaking from my experience, that's a problem because language it it suffuses knowledge. There's there's no knowledge without language, and this is not a novel statement. It's an all-encompassing problem. Those teachers were once uh, in their life they were students. So if they had problems acquiring knowledge that was delivered in a language they didn't really what they were not familiar with. Now that they have they have become teachers, that problem will still persist.
What compelled me to ask you right to talk right today was that last week I had posted a question um, regarding this idea. I've been struggling with coming up with a word that doesn't mean reparations. So there's this idea of reparations that if something there was an injustice that was committed in the past, and now it's been affecting the people who the descendants of those people. So if you give those people, the descendants, reparations, you don't what you're doing is you're kind of making up for the past injustice. But if somebody had their language taken from them, for example, you don't work on giving it back to them. Instead, you work on building resources so that they can be better, have better success in the language that in the colonial language that they're forced to use. So that's not what I'm talking about. What
Mm,
I'm talking about
yeah.
is how do you say, okay, there was this injustice in the past and it's continuing in an ongoing sense. So starting in 1884, you said people were unable to get education in their local language. And that continues to happen, and so it continues to affect generation after generation after generation of students in Cameroon. So the question is, what would be a term that says, okay, we recognize that there was this inequity in the past, and it's continuing, and so we're going to fix it now so that going forward that inequity doesn't exist anymore.
That's that's very nice. That's very nice question. Thank you. Again, I'll divert for some very few seconds from the answer to just state the what your question inspires me. We in linguistics and social linguistics research and applied linguistics research. There's in late years there has been a growing appeal for heterogeneous knowledge. How are we lacking that heterogeneity when we are not including like the majority of the world languages into the epistemic space? So now this is a word that we have, but actually that's not a word. That's like, let's say, a right.
Mm-hmm.
That's this is a religious right that is meant to dispel a wrongdoing and to prevent it from happening. We call that right to Gwet. So actually, this is a
Say that again.
three-word expression.
Say that again.
So tuk, tuk, igwet. So if I am articulating it like the way we want me to articulate, you will hear tuk, igwet.
Mm-hmm.
So where what is meant by that is that we the community are coming together. We recognize that there has been wrongdoing. We don't want to punish anyone. We don't want to blame anyone, but we don't want it to happen, and we want to repair the moral injustice of those who were the victims of that wrongdoing. So we are not going to punish those who committed it, but we are going to acknowledge the suffering of those who witnessed it. And we are going to do in such a way that it doesn't happen in the future. So again, that right is called tuk igwet. But in normal interaction, you will hear me calling it tuk gwet. Tuk gwet. So without that E, which is an associative marker, but in normal speech, I will call it tuk gwet, where gwet means war. So we are waging war against injustice, waging war against injustice in order to repair and not to punish, and with the aim of preventing it from happening in the future. This right is found in Bassa, but I wouldn't be surprised if we have equivalent rights in other African communities, of course.
Mm-hmm. So, thank you. That was just a great answer. I every time I had a question I wanted to ask you, you got ahead of me with more with the explanation that I was hoping to hear. So thanks for that. I think we should say farewell for now because it's getting dark, and I know you have limited power, and
Yeah,
but I wish you a good trip to Tokyo.
thank you very much, and thank you. I was happy to have this conversation with you, and feel free to come back to me anytime you want to talk, or you want to learn more about how language the language problem, because it's a problem. What's how the language problem is going in Africa.
Well, hopefully we'll have more opportunities to do so very soon. And hopefully I will have solved the problems I am having on my side with the Zoom installation on my computer, and we'll be able to have smoother conversations next time. But meanwhile,
Yeah,
have a good trip and have a good week, and I'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Martin.
Thanks so
Goodbye.
much, Emmanuel. Bye bye.